Generative AI holds incredible promise for financial services organizations, but the challenges financial services organizations face in creating GenAI solutions are supersized. Some of those challenges include the incredible speed of change in AI models, ecosystem tools, applications, and processes, figuring out what problems GenAI can best solve for your organization, CapEx, OpEx, and investment uncertainty. Where should organizations invest? And then there's the AI learning curve for resources, and there's limited expertise and experience out there. You figure all that out, and then once you have that, you got to have the right solutions, integrating them into your data environment and being able to procure, deploy, and manage all of this efficiently. In today's session, we'll explore practical advice and best practices from two companies, Dell and SHI, who have been working together to enable financial services organizations to succeed with generative AI. We will look more closely at the GenAI challenges financial services organizations face and some best practices for solving those. In addition, we'll hear about GenAI use cases that are working best in the sector. I'm Mark Beckhue, Principal Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. I lead our coverage of generative AI, and I'm excited to be joined by Ricardo Tavares-Diaz, who's Director of Global Industries for the Financial Services Industry Vertical at Dell Technologies, Gopal Kutty, who is the Global Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer at SHI International, and Ganesh Sharma Tiagali, the Lead Data Scientist for SHI. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their day-to-day responsibilities. Let's start with Ricardo. Hi, Ricardo. Please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello, Mark. Thank you very much for having myself and for having Dell here today. And I'm very happy to be here, accompanied by some of our best partners representatives, SHI, Gopal, and Ganesh as well. In Dell Global Industries, our focus is to provide and equip our customers with solutions that address specific vertical needs. And this is not necessarily a direct connection to our products, but it is certainly built on infrastructure that we provide many times and added with many components, ingredients that quite often sourced from some of our partners, from our large ecosystem of friends in the industry. And our aim in the end of the day is to really build the solutions that help our customers solve their problems.
Excellent. Thank you, Ricardo. Gopal, how about you?
Well, I have a role as the innovation and strategy officer for Globals, which is an organization that comprises about 130 of the largest accounts in the world. And the job essentially is to figure out what the customer pain points are, come up with new products and services that help them. Because at the end of the day, our customers want to be more competitive. They want to either reduce their costs, increase their profits. And the idea is to come up with new innovative solutions that can really help them to get where they are. That's the job in a nutshell.
All right, Ganesh, how about you?
First of all, thank you, Mark, and having me here and having Gopal, and thank you, Ricardo. So I'm the lead data scientist at SHI. So in some sense, I'm responsible for thinking through the generative AI solutions and use cases for our customers, right? So we want to meet the customer where they are, right, at whatever the journey they have. And generative AI journey has become very important for the customers, right? Not just because of the FOMO part of it, but also because the FOMO part of it, they're very fear of like messing up and so on, but they want to be part of it. And that's where we come in, partner with them and take them along the journey, meet where they are. So I lead a group of data scientists and AI engineers at SHI who we craft and collaborate with our customers, crafting these GenAI solutions. So very happy to be here.
I appreciate that. And by the way, I'll let our watchers and people that are looking at this video know that these two guys that would just introduce themselves are those rare, experienced data science folks that we're all looking for. So don't try and steal them from SHI. They got things to do. All right, we're going to start with a look at the state of the market. So I'm going to set the stage for our questions. It's just a little bit of a view of some of the research that we put together. We had a study we just put out called Navigating Build versus Buy Dynamics for Enterprise-Ready AI. And we have actually some specific financial services specific data. Here are a few interesting insights in what financial services organizations are thinking about in operationalizing AI and what's relevant to our discussion today. So here's a couple of points. 83% of financial services respondents to our survey said they have AI in production. 83%. But watch this, only 27% have GenAI projects in production. Big difference there. Another point, 38% of financial services respondents say data management and quality is the biggest challenge to implementing AI in their organization, while 33% cited business integration and aligning AI solutions with business outcomes as being the challenge. Another point, 33% of financial services respondents say the most significant factor to achieving value from their AI projects they have deployed is scalability of the solution. And one more point, 40% of those financial services respondents say that for an AI solution to be enterprise ready, it's essential that it ensures data sovereignty, privacy, and compliance. All right, so that just kind of sets the stage for a bunch of questions I have, and we're going to dive in. We're going to start with Ricardo. So let's start with your company's partnership, between Dell and SHI. How are you working together to help financial services organizations with AI?
Look, Dell is a provider of infrastructure, as I said before, and we recognize that having a complete solution in our customers' hands takes more than infrastructure. Actually, it takes a lot more ingredients, but two of the other essential ingredients are effectively software and services. And I would argue that services are even probably more important than everything else. So Dell is always on the search for partners that can complement our offerings, that can work closely with our teams. And we present ourselves as a united front to the customer. So SHI is one of such very good partners that we have that has proven over the years that is able to work together very, very well to provide a customer with the end solution that solves the problem.
Got it. All right. Let's turn to Gopal and see about SHI. What products and services does SHI bring to this partnership, to the table?
Well, at a high level, I mean, our objective is to, add value to our customers, right? In the field of AI, what we really want to help them is with the entire life cycle. So, broadly speaking, we say we like to help the customers imagine, experiment, and adopt. The imagine phase essentially is the ideation phase, where customers can come to us, they can talk through their problems. What are they trying to achieve with GenAI? What is the objective? So we would consult with them and come up with a plan. Experiment is we usually do a timed POC, a proof of concept, and it can be as short as 6 weeks. Most of them don't last longer than 6 weeks because the nature of GenAI is that very quickly you can come to an understanding of whether something is going to work or not. And phase 3 is the adopt. That's when we look at, the underlying hardware, the chipsets, the connectors, how do we implement at scale? So these are the 3 phases, and there's value at every stage attached to the customer. So what we bring is, our expertise in these areas, our team of data scientists. We have, everything from imagining right up to delivering, super pods, building and delivering super pods. We have a 400,000 square foot integration center where we build these. So we are involved at every stage of the life cycle of the customer's AI journey.
Ganesh, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yes. To put the point of Gopal was making, right, like partnering with the customer, but also partnering with our partners, right? So we, for example, we have Dell servers in our lab that Gopal was mentioning that, right? We host them and we bring in the customers to experiment on those servers, right? So, and along with that, we have storage partners, we have other compute partners. So we provide an environment for the customers to be able to sort of understand the possible ROIs, because I think I want to sort of relate to one of the first data point that you made, right? They are 81% plus with AI, but very like less than 30% for Gen AI. And I think the main reason there is this question about the ROI that we keep on hearing from our customers is Gen AI is a very complex endeavor. And there are so many like components and wheels and gears that work toward with it. So, but how do I sort of understand the ROI, and do I need to go and invest everything before the thinking through the ROI possibility? And that's where the idea part and the imagination and the experimentation parts comes in, and that's where we partner with our partners like Dell and others, right? So that the customer can experience it on our premises of what they can do eventually in their own data centers or on their cloud or wherever they would like to see it in production. And that is where I think we add a lot of value to the customers and to our partners at the same time, right? Bring them together in one place, and we add our sort of secret sauce of our technological expertise, right? As you know, well aware, and as you were sort of alluding to earlier, talent is scarce, right? And so especially there, so you have both kind of talent. You need the human talent to make things happen, and you need the compute and those resources, and that's also getting scarce as we see. And so bringing them together is, I think, one of what SHI we are endeavoring more and more day in and day out to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, Ganesh makes a really good point about ROI. So I'd like to touch on that for a second, if I could. A lot of projects actually fail because of misaligned business objectives. And, one of them is that ROI is not computed correctly, right? At a very high level, I mean, you have the cost components of ROI. You have direct costs, implementation costs, operational costs. Then you have the benefits, which are qualitative and quantitative. But there's also risk, right? There's risk factors, which is technical risks, operational risks, business risks. So we take all these into consideration, and then we come up with a risk-adjusted ROI. And that risk-adjusted ROI is key, because looking at that, the client can figure out what's the element of risk, how do we adjust this, should the project be a go and no go. And it also takes care of, first order effects of a solution, second order effects, because a lot of people don't think through all these things. And if you have misaligned business objectives, let's say the line of business versus IT versus compliance, then you run into problems. So thinking through these things right up front, I think, reduces the chance that a project will go astray.
So let's stay with that for a second, Ricardo. We're talking about these pain points, and Gopal and Ganesh are talking about this. Sometimes we talk about, you said, a high percentage of failed AI projects. What else can financial services organizations do to guard against that, in your view?
Look, this is a very interesting topic, because we know that the average failure in generic IT projects is already very high, in some cases as high as 66%. However, we see that the failure in AI projects, as my colleagues were referring to, and you referred to in the beginning of the call, can be as high as 80%. And that is obviously unacceptable. So the first thing to do is try to evaluate what failure means in an IT project. Because there are technical failures, there are adoption failures, there are financial failures, and there are other types, right? So we need to understand what that means exactly. But on top of that, Dell has taken a very different approach as the AI revolution, if I may call that, has started. We have created a platform which we call the Dell AI Factory, which is essentially not only a set of infrastructure, but also an ecosystem of partners, use cases that have been pre-built. In fact, some recipes that help reduce the risk. But most importantly, the Dell AI Factory has its eyes set on allowing the customer to test iteratively different AI projects or different versions of an AI project as well, without necessarily taking them as a failure. Because we know for a fact, as Ganesh was referring to, the complexity of many of these AI solutions relies on the number of different components that have to work together. Sometimes components that are running in different systems asynchronously and with connections that are not always persistent, let's say.
What changes or trends is SHI seeing in the areas that your customers are focusing on now versus, say, 12 months ago? And as a follow-up to that, since these financial services firms are typically on the cutting edge of technology, what are the future areas of focus that you're helping them with?
Well, I mean, this field is, evolving rapidly, right? So, 12 to 18 months ago, you had people basically doing basic prompt engineering, whether it was, zero shot, single shot, multi-shot. They were typically working with a closed model, like a chat GPT and doing prompt engineering, right? Then, RAG came into vogue, and then you had people working with, your basic RAG or your vector RAG, then the graph RAG, agentic RAG, and then, hybrid RAGs comprising, two of these RAGs. I mean, I remember we built our first hybrid RAG in Feb of 24, right? But now RAG is table stakes, right? Now I think that the evolution now is people are looking at fine tuning. So fine tuning was in vogue back in, I think, 21, 22, then it fell out of vogue. Now it's coming back into fashion, right? And fine tuning, we're finding that more and more companies are doing fine tuning, but they're doing it with smaller models. You don't have to have, do fine tuning in a huge model. But and a line of business could do fine tuning on, for a specific use case for a specific purpose. You don't have to fine tune on a giant model. The other thing, of course, is the rise of agentic, right? Agentic is the big buzzword these days. And agentic, I think, is going to really take off, because one thing that was holding it back for large scale implementations was that, a lot of connections traditionally are being made by APIs, traditional APIs, and there's a problem, and there's a fundamental disconnect between the probabilistic nature of these AI models and the deterministic nature of traditional APIs. In other words, to connect to an API, to the 5 different APIs, you may have different code, different authentication methods, and so on. So now MCP is coming to vogue. MCP is Model Context Protocol that Anthropic came out with, I think, in November of last year. And just this Friday, I think at Google Next, they announced their support. OpenAI is on board. I think about 2 weeks ago, they made an announcement. So we're now working, very closely and trying to come up with models, because MCP and A2A are going to work hand in hand together. So that, I think, is going to increase the scale at which agentic AI actually performs. Because now you're going beyond chat, right? Now you're going to multi-process implementations, which I think is a huge change.
Ganesh, did you have anything you wanted to add in there? Thoughts?
Yeah, and like Gopal stole some of my thunder actually. So, but no, but in a good way, right?
Yeah.
But also I think it gives me an opportunity to sort of reflect back on what Ricardo said a while back, because what he said sort of triggered some important like consideration from a data scientist perspective, and also one that we have heard from especially companies in financial services industry, is about observability and data, right? They go hand in hand, and a lot of the ROI consideration that also comes from is that about this intersection. GenAI is famously or infamously is non-deterministic, right? You don't know what the next output will be, because it might depend on the prompt. But even for the same prompt or the same kind of inputs, the output will be different. And if of all the industries, probably financial and healthcare are one where you really do not want non-determinism, right? You want the numbers to mean what they mean, and which means is you want to be confident about what goes in and what goes out. And then it's also a very regulated industry, right? The data has to be secure. You need to take care of PII data and so on. Of those kind of regulations and privacy consideration also provide a bit of unique challenges to like banks and other financial industry vertical that we work with. And some of the work, that's where we work actually with them actively there, right? As our role in sort of collaborating with their solution is to understand these complexities and bring solutions to address it, right? Say for example, in terms of observability, we can work with them with our own toolings, right? And say what, like, how do you control for data poisoning, or how do you control for data leakage, right? And how do you evaluate these non-deterministic responses, and like use RAG and other frameworks that like what Gopal was mentioning, to scope the solutions and scope the output to what is necessary and required by that industry or by that corporation, right? That's some of those core competence that we add value to that. And then there is the part about the data itself, right? Another common thing that you keep on hearing is you are ready for AI, but is your data ready, right? Because especially with like our large companies, the data is distributed, is in multi-modal and multi-fragmented, and they are in multiple data lakes. There are different LOBs controlling different sections. and regulations again, right? And that's another point where we would normally work with the company, enterprise to understand that and sort of come with craft solutions. Some of them are bespoke, but some of them are also core AI technology like federated learning, right? So we build a platform to take care of these issues where a bank or somebody have these different LOBs whose data cannot move across a geographic boundaries or LOB boundaries. But now they want to sort of leverage these insights together. Say, for example, if I'm going to process a payment, I want to understand whether there is any fraud indication there, but that it would involving the customer data, but correctly anonymized from some other LOB, and then the transaction data from some other geography, right? And then you would have risk assessment from some other component of the company, and you want to be able to keep the data separate but bring the insights together, right? That's when you have these federated learning platforms that you build so that you run the small models at each of those endpoints and then have sort of bring the weights and gradients together for a combined insight. See, so that's one way of addressing the data challenges, right? In terms of the privacy and geography consideration, but also generating to the taking to the conversation to the next level, that you are not constrained by these data fragmentation to leverage the insights that's inherent in this data.
In other words, the data is not going to the model is going to the data.
Yep.
Right? That's essentially the concept of federated learning.
Right.
So just for a
So that's another of the cutting edge that more and more
perspective.
companies are looking at, right? Like apart from the agentic.
Yeah.
And just to build on the agentic part, and cut me off if I'm talking too much. That happens when you have a data scientist in a conversation. Right? So is till now, as Gopal was pointing out, a lot of this was more of an interaction kind of usage, right? Now we are going to the action part of it, right? It's great to get information and share information, but sort of action without like knowledge without action is literally like meaningless, right? So that's where we are taking the agents take us to the next level, where now you can have these say conversational chatbots working with the customer, the end customer, to do the next step. So I don't have to just say what is the best CD rate that I can get. Now they can look at the say the virtual assistant can say these are the things, and I know you have done this kind of work with us. So I think we can provide you with this, get the right agent. In this case, it's an agent, not as in a human, right? But an agent will sort of look at the like real time data and can provide in like, okay, you should go with this CD. I'm going to fill in this form for you and you approve it and we'll create an account for you or whatever it is, right? So the agentic workflow provides for these action oriented workflows, so your operation efficiency suddenly now skyrockets. And but again, this brings with its challenges. Human in the loop is essential. So how do you marry human in the loop and that for human observability along with this agent, because they're now taking actions? So obviously there are no free lunches, right? But this also brings, it's a good challenge to have, because now we are sort of working with two dimensions. One is about operational efficiency and another with observability.
Yeah,
And
we
then
could take a whole webcast to talk about agentic AI and where it's going, right? So yeah, let's go here to a little broader idea, back to Gopal, and say this pain point around, we mentioned up front, had these statistics around scaling and struggling to scale AI. Talk about that for a minute and what kind of strategies can solve this idea.
Yeah, I mean, scaling is a problem, but there are everyone thinks about scaling as an issue, and that really comes up when I think a lot of times people haven't thought through exactly what the problem is. Because a lot of times what we found is that someone comes to us and says, I want to do XYZ and I want to scale it because I have 250,000 employees and I need to do this, that, and the other. And then upon probing, it comes out that actually you don't need one model to rule them all. You can actually break that problem up into smaller subsets and work with smaller models and then conjoin those models. And federated learning, as Ganesh pointed out, is actually a very good solution for certain use cases. But scaling problems typically arise because the customer hasn't really thought through the problem. You may not need to scale. In the cases where you do need to scale, data is actually a very big problem, right? Because the data isn't ready. There's data governance issues, there's data cleanliness issues, there's issues around where the data has come from, the provenance of the data, And that's when you get into, data labeling and cleansing and all this stuff. So it gets complicated. But again, what we found is that most organizations don't really need to scale that much. The other problem is, as I alluded to earlier, is actually organizational mismatch. People haven't thought through the different lines of business. What value are they going to get from the scaling? And once you actually break the problem down, it can be, it becomes apparent that you actually don't need to scale.
I want to sort of build on that, right? Like Gopal made an interesting point. I know, like about scaling is not an essential way to look at the problem here, right? Because one of and just yesterday, for example, I was talking to one of the engineers who was working with the company, global, and they had this constant struggle about decentralizing and centralizing, right? So for people, when they think about AI solution, they think of more and more centralized infrastructures, one data center, one model to sort of provide all the information. And they were coming back saying, actually, I would prefer a much more well managed, well behaved models at a local level, scope at a LOB level, or and all the way up to like the device level, right? This is something that we and Ricardo were talking just before we sort of started this conversation, like our AI devices. And for example, Ricardo mentioned about NPUs. Now, like Dell is providing these devices which are AI capable, and this is at everybody's desktop, literally, right? And that's where the scaling is can be handled. I mean, it brings with its own a distribution challenge, which is a different from a typical scale up kind of challenge that sort of companies expect when they think about scaling issues, right? Now, instead of all the thousands of employees going to one place, now the model itself is going it at each of their like desktops to be handled at that level, right? So you need a different kind of compute, obviously, and a different kind of infrastructure to provide it. But now your requirements are actually scaled down in some sense, right? You don't need those ultra powerful inference engines at the data center. Your AI devices with NPUs and GPUs, for example, can take care of these bespoke small models, and with an added benefit of a low latency. And also you can also now suddenly start looking at more complex situations of providing data regulations, right? Data security at that level. We can even think in terms of air gapped devices, because now the model itself resides on the edge device, right? Then so it brings in a lot of other comfort and reduces the complexity that are inherent in the centralized and scaling kind of the older model of thinking. So the enterprises should now really think in a more holistic way, right? As to what Gopal is saying, let's talk about the business problem first, right? And then come to the technology solutions.
People don't, people will come and say, like, I have someone who's doing this task, and what I want to do is I want to automate. Or they'll say, I want to augment. This person now, with the help of AI, becomes super intelligent. But the question is, does that process need to be automated? This is an opportunity to relook at the whole process. Why do you need that process in the first place? Is there a better way to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve? Right. So once you start asking those questions, then it's a different frame of the problem, and that's when it can lead to better solutions.
Just to illustrate, if I may provide an illustration to the points that Gopal and Ganesh were making, which I think are very, very valid. Look at maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was an organization, there is still, called SETI, who is receiving radio signals from space with some very large antennas across the planet. And the problem that they were suffering at that point in time was that they didn't have enough computing power to process those signals and to detect the type of patterns that they were trying to detect. So they did something very interesting that some of us who have been in the industry for a few years might remember. They started distributing a free screensaver for people to install on their computers. So that screensaver would actually process that data that they needed to be processed when the computer was idle, not doing anything other than doing a screensaver. Right? So analogous to this today, we are finding, as my colleagues were saying here in the panel, that a lot of what we were doing with AI in the last 3 years was seriously based on the concept of brute force. So we were trying to literally kill the fly with the cannonball. And Now we found that we can make our cannons more precise and smaller, and spread them. And this is actually very interesting, the timing as this happens, because we were just discussing, 4 or 5 years ago about edge devices and how edge devices can be used to the points that Ganesh was making to process data at the point of acquisition with all the benefits that brings to the process in the end of the day. And also, very, very key, questioning the processes, as Gopal was saying, I think is essential to redesign, because a part of evolution is doing things faster, but even more, evolution is doing things better, and this is the dichotomy that we have to use as well.
So let's do this. We were going to talk a little bit about use cases. So let's stick with you, Ricardo, for this one. And you, in our prep, when we were talking about doing this talk, you shared some data on AI use cases for financial services organizations that have invested in and some they haven't. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that I have even shared a little slide that I can share here again. So this is some data that is coming from the so-called Executives AI Playbook by McKinsey. It's actually a very interesting interactive application that McKinsey has on their website for free. You can search for it. And what this is showing is that when we look at banking specifically and AI applications, we know that there is a huge potential in the financial services industry, both banking and insurance. But to earlier points that I think Gopal was making, a large amount of the projects that are being deployed are less GenAI and a lot more traditional AI. So traditional AI, what we are talking about is about augmenting human capabilities, making humans faster, making humans perhaps a little smarter. However, it is not disruptive. So look, some of the use cases that you can see here that are where the real potential for savings and the real potential for change exists are in the more complex areas like risk management, like customer experience, and the everything that touches the customer, not only from the front end, but also from the back end in terms of process management, document processing, and so on and so forth. And those areas are a lot more complex to tackle. And I suspect that this is one of the reasons why banks have left them on the sidelines for the time being, precisely for the reasons that Gopal was mentioning, which is when you touch those areas, the first thing you are going to do is you are going to question, why are we doing this in the first place? Shouldn't we be redesigning the entire process? And this is more than AI. This is organizational. However, we also know that, to be very frank, this is a very interesting topic, which is many of the large banks have very, very heavy legacy systems. We are even talking, in some cases, of systems that have been running for 40 years based on IBM mainframes and COBOL languages. And on the other hand, we see now fintech companies that can literally be up and running with a small data center and a handful of people. And they can challenge the Goliath banks with a tiny infrastructure and just because they are taking advantage of today's technologies and today's ability to do more with less. So what's going to happen, in my view, is that these processes are going to be redesigned. These legacy systems will have to disappear because they carry with them an enormous cost. When we talk about maintaining mainframes today, I have nothing against mainframes. I started my career with mainframes in the industry as well. but it's no longer sustainable and acceptable that we are doing this. So I believe that those complex use cases are going to eventually be tackled, and we are seeing more and more willingness in that direction.
So thanks for that.
No?
All right, so we got to wrap this up. We're going to ask for each of you, and we'll start with Gopal. What walk-away advice would you give to financial services organizations that are tackling AI?
That's a question that could take an hour to answer. But I think the number one thing is, first, I know you started the call off with build versus buy. And a corollary to that is, do I do this on my own or do I engage with a partner? Now, obviously, I have a vested interest here, but I would say that you do need to engage with a partner, because I think partners that are working in a wide variety of fields have a lot of expertise. And I think it sometimes helps to have an outside perspective to bear, because if you're in an organization and you look at a problem, you're kind of looking at it perhaps in a myopic view. So I think it's always helps to have a partner that can come in and give a fresh perspective. But the one piece of advice I would say is, when selecting a partner, talk directly to the data scientists. Don't talk to the salespeople. Don't talk to the marketing people. Talk to the data scientists and then figure out the quality of the data scientists. And that's a good indicator of a partner. That way you can judge the quality of the people. What have they done? What have they built? What are their credentials? And then you can go forward with confidence.
Ganesh, how about you? What's walk-away advice that you would give?
I would definitely double down on what Gopal said, right? Not just because there's my compatriot here, but also because, and that he sort of elevated the data scientist to a big role. But it's, I think the way I perceive ourselves is like Sherpa, right? Yeah, you want to conquer Mount Everest, you want to sort of go up the Himalayas. And you might be capable of doing all alone without even oxygen, but that's rare, right? And so that's good that you have those muscles. But having a Sherpa is a great way to ensure that you do it more efficiently, and that more importantly, when there are risks there are person like the shaper will take care of those, right? Sort of advise you on this is the right path to take, and the cliff that you want to avoid, and this is where you will have the avalanches, right? So that experience, because like partners like us, right, like when we are working with our other partners, right, Dell and others, right, we understand a larger space. And one of the great I think so achievements of AI is that in some sense it has a lot of horizontal impact, right? All these verticals are there, right? Financial industries have their own specific challenges, say, as compared to pharma. But AI also, because it looks at a fundamental way of how the numbers and patterns work, right? It sort of understands that these insights are transferable. It's like soft skills that in olden days they used to say, right, the same way. So because we work in multiple industries, we can bring that additional insight to the it's like a financial industry and say, look, we can, this problem looks very much like what we solved for somebody else, and we should be able to sort of solve it for you. It might be a different use case in a bespoke way, but the fundamentals are still the truth, right? This is one of the things that we sort of talked about earlier also, how certain fundamentals are across the industries, and then you sort of work with your partners to make it applicable to your industry, right? So I think that conscious understanding that a sort of not just a one solution is applicable to all, but that you would need to partner to understand how it is applicable. I think this is a very key decision you need to make right up front, in that saying that before taking the journey, right? Otherwise, however iterative and agile these processes are, especially in the current way when everybody has to like run to just be in the same place, it makes more sense to partner right up front and take that help as you move along the journey.
Very good. Ricardo, how about you?
Along the same lines of my colleagues, look, the FSI industry has been historically very secretive about how it does things. So banks are known for not sharing what they are doing with other banks, with other organizations, and that is very understandable. However, we are in a new age where collaboration is important. Collaboration with your ecosystem of partners, collaboration with even sometimes some of your competitors, due to the challenging regulatory environments that we are living in. So being prepared for failing and looking at failure in the eye and saying, okay, we have to try again, and prepare your infrastructure for multiple projects at the same time. The financial industry is going to be extremely competitive. It's going to be completely different in 10 years' time. So the banks and insurance companies that will survive are the more adaptable ones. The Darwinistic approach works perfectly here.
Right.
So being fast.
You're willing to adapt.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Very good. All right. Well, I thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. A lot of things to think about here. A lot of cool insights around what's going on with AI and how to implement AI in financial services organizations. So we're going to wrap this up. If you would like to find out more detailed information about what we discussed today, you can see on the screen where to go. Thank you to Ricardo and Gopal and Ganesh today for their insights. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.